Mike, you know what? It wasn't enough that you had to cover this today. You did some more work for us. You actually did an interview on a new book. Tell us about the book.
That's right. I spoke to a local author, Chad Hunter. He came out with a book called Black Parakeets, Only Hatch in December. Chad is a is a prolific writer in Northwest Indiana. He talks about him growing up in East Chicago. It's a small little industrial town.
And we talked about that before on the afternoon shift.
It's had its political corruption issues there, but it also has a long history, wide history of being culturally diverse. Everything from Eastern Europeans to African Americans to a large Hispanic community. So he talks about his life growing up there as an African American man. Just, he had his book out.
So yeah, let's hear some of that. Let's hear the interview that Mike Puente did with Chad Hunter on the book called Black Parakeets Only Hatch in December.
I tell people if you go east of the city and try and stay on land, you're going to end up in the water. So you kind of have to go down, and you end up in East Chicago, and sometimes you have to explain to people it's not the east side of Chicago. It is literally East Chicago, Indiana. Life in East Chicago, especially when I was growing up, was, and still is to this day, a good culmination, a good, I hate the word melting pot, but I can't think of another phrase for it, where you do have blacks, African Americans, you do have a very large Hispanic population. And, we always say we had like the 1% white population that were still left over from, the original Polish that came in there and founded the town and worked the steel mills. And I always felt like where most cities still had to go through racial issues, racial disparity. I know Chicago has large minority groups, but it's almost like there's Chinatown, there's Little Korea, there's Little Italy. Where in the harbor and in East Chicago, it seemed like we were all just kind of like neck and neck, side by side with each other.
So do you think you had some sort of an advantage when you hear about these racial issues, whether it be in Hammond or Gary, and either parts of Chicago? You feel like you sort of been insulated from some of that?
Yeah, I don't think we were so much isolated from it or kept apart from it as we were. You grew up and Jose was your friend, and then he was Hispanic. I mean, we grew up with the fact that people were just different. And it did kind of give us, I think, in my opinion, the ability to take people as they were, to realize that we had differences, to find some of those differences funny, not offending anybody, but it's just the way it was. But at the end of the day, I felt like we all looked at each other as just being, oh, well, that's Jose is my friend. I don't care if he's Mexican, Puerto Rican, whatever, or that's Marcus. He's my friend. I don't care if he's black or white or whatever.
So would you describe this book as sort of a memoir?
I'd say memoir. The only reason why memoirs always makes me pause because people think, well, are you like, a prince, a king or something, or a celebrity? It's a memoir. It's a collection of anecdotes. One of the things that I really pride myself on about the book, or I should say I'm most proud about the book, is that literally anybody can read it and find something that connects. Because I think the book is a lot about what it's like to just be human. And then on top of that, it's, male, black, growing up in the Midwest. Because I've gotten feedback from middle-aged female that are white. And they're like, oh, my God, I read the story. And the story about your sister touched me. Or the story about dating reminded me of my son. Or the story about yours. So I think there's a little bit something there for everybody. And it really does hit that human vibe with people.
So the title of the book, Black Parakeets Only Hatch in December, you explained it in the book, but how did you come up with that title?
First, I'm black, so there's
okay,
that.
Got that.
December is my birthday. I'm almost a Christmas baby, and Parakeets comes from my. It was my father-in-law before he was my father-in-law, and he heard me on the phone with my wife, who I was dating at the time, and I'm sure I was nervous as hell and just chattering and stuff. And he asked her, he's like, "What's that parakeet on the phone you're talking to?" And one day I was washing clothes and I was writing the book, and the book was kind of almost like a therapeutic, cathartic way of working out some stuff. I needed a title, and it came out, with Black Parakeets Only Hatch in December.
Now I do notice in the book you do tend to weave in a lot of comic book lingo, whether it's referring to Superman, Clark Kent, Thor. It's all in there. Were you a comic book fan growing up, and did that help you to kind of write this along?
Oh yeah, huge comic book fan, still am. It's my opinion that it gave me, growing up, a certain degree of escapism. I'm a child of divorce. We moved. I'm human, so I've got my fair share of tragedies and stuff that happened that made growing up kind of rough. So it was always nice to pick up a book and jump into it. And then, you look at Captain America or Iron Man or Thor or those guys, or Batman, Superman. And as a kid, it was helpful to sometimes bury your head inside one of those books.
Let me ask you this. Growing up and connecting with other ethnicities, cultures, has that helped you in relating, or at least relating to those other cultures in your professional life?
Oh, yeah. The city of East Chicago, growing up in the harbor, taught me nothing else. It was the fact that first thing you do in a new situation is you shut up, you open your eyes and your ears, and you realize that everybody's everybody. So especially when you grow up with people who are blue-collar workers, you see everybody gets tired, everybody gets worn out, everybody wants their best for their kids, for their family. And it kind of helps you to see people as just people, and then, everything else comes second.
We live in a region, the Chicagoland region and Northwest Indiana, where it's really defined by some of it's more ethnic enclaves, whether it's Pilsen or Little Village or Inglewood. There's a black section, white sections, Hispanic sections. How do you feel like in East Chicago, which is this kind of unique little city in Indiana for its diversity, how has that, as far as your upbringing there, has it allowed you to sort of see things differently in a way where everything may not be black and white? Like, for example, the issue in Ferguson. We all know the issue with the unarmed black teenager being shot by a white police officer.
Right.
And most African Americans are against it. Most whites may be for the police officer. Do you step back and say, well, I can kind of see it from both sides?
Oh, yeah. Growing up in East Chicago, you did, because you were at everybody's house. You were over at, your Mexican friend's house, or your black friend's house, your white friend's house. And you grew up with everybody. And so you can kind of, you take world situations or nationwide situations, and you can't help but put faces to it, like, oh, but that kid, I think Michael Brown is the young man that was shot. Wow, he looks like the one friend I grew up. Or you look at the cop, well, that cop reminds me of so-and-so's cousin. So you do kind of get this lens that you apply automatically or subconsciously about world events. And we, like in the city, you do have like Pilsen, and you've got, all these, little suburbs or neighborhoods that slice up the city, and each group slices up ethnically. One benefit is that the harbor in Chicago it just wasn't that damn big. You couldn't slice it up, so only the Latinos had New Edition, and the blacks had Guthrie, and we didn't have that much room. So we were kind of forced to. It was like live together or die, in a sense, and we kind of did evolve into this mixture.
How has your upbringing and your closeness or connection with Hispanics or white groups, how has that affected your writing? How has that had influenced you as a writer?
Oh, big time. And I think when you write, well, let me back up and say it's one thing that a writer is black, Hispanic, white, female, whatever. But it's another thing to be called, the black writer, the Mexican reporter, the female president, whatever it is. So you do kind of have that, you carry that weight with you, especially as a writer, that you don't want to, I write what I write. I don't write for any particular group, but I don't write to cut out any particular group. So it does give me an awareness, because especially there's places where I go where they see Chad Hunter, and this is not what they expect to walk in. And so it does, it gives me a focus I always keep with me.
Sometimes when a person is exposed to another race or culture, it can actually backfire. Do you know of an instance where somebody, say a black friend or a relative, just kind of feels that maybe you've lost somewhat of your connection, say maybe to the black experience?
Oh, yeah. I've had friends that, your close friends know you, and they know what you've come up through, and they know your family and stuff. But some people don't know all that. So I've had some friends that are like, why do you, or people I meet like, why do you talk white? And I don't know if Hispanics have been hit with that. I'm sure to some degree they have, but I know black kids growing up, we would always hear that. Why you talk white? Why are you trying to talk white? And my brother and sisters, and we talked to our mom. My mom's like, you're not talking white. You talk like you got an education. That's why our mom was working on these jobs so we can go to school. And it's that statement always kind of bugged me because it sounds like only one ethnic group can talk educated, and so it does backfire. Sometimes groups are not prepared to hear you write, and but you're from the harbor. Everybody thinks I'm not from the harbor. Then when I say it, they're like, "What? You don't sound like it." But if I'm comfortable and at home, I'll probably talk a different way. It's code switching. I think Gerard McClendon, the local personality, talked once about code switching. You talk one way around your family and friends. You might talk a different way professionally. It's not being fake. It's just you. Sometimes you change your lingo.
When people read this book, what do you want them to come away with? Do you think they get a better understanding of what it's like growing up in this hugely diverse, little, small enclave in northern Indiana?
I like that. I like that it could shine a positive light on the city. East Chicago, as you know, gets a bad rep for public corruption. Unfortunately, a lot of that's true. East Chicago is often seen as like, it's one of those towns where people shudder like, ooh, you go to East Chicago, or you work in East Chicago, or you from East Chicago.
Well, in that respect, it does live up to its bigger brother, Chicago.
Right. So I do hope that it does make people think that the town's not hell on earth. And I want people to read the book and walk away feeling a little more human, because the book is about just the human experience. And I want people to connect. And I want it to hit a chord with people so that they do think about, the book talks about grief, the book talks about life, love, etc. So it hits them, and that readers enjoy it, and they go, wow, I feel better because I read that story. That story made me laugh.
What about in terms of, just showing a different view of Indiana? So many people may have a view of Indiana just being sort of white and conservative and Republican.
Yeah.
And East Chicago, in large part, is none of that.
Yeah, I have buddies from Chicago, and I used to go salsa dancing all the time down in the city, and they used to call me Indiana because I was the only guy that drove from Indiana to go, and they'd say, you're from Indiana, and they'd say, we never thought there were any black people in Indiana. They're like, are you on a farm? And I'm like, I live closer to a crack house than I do a farmhouse. So yeah, I want people to read the book and kind of understand that Indiana is. We're not that far from Chicago. We got culture, we got cool things here, we got stuff that makes taking notice of us worthwhile.
Chad Hunter is a local writer from Northwest Indiana. He's the author of the book Black Parakeets Only Hatch in December. Chad, thank you for joining us here on WBEZ.
Michael, thank you very much.